everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Our Circle. I'm Rhiannon.
And I'm Jess.
And today we have a special guest with us. We have a human rights advocate and a mental health advocate, Natalie Whitmore.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming on today's episode. We're so happy to have you. I guess sort of jumping straight into things, the past 10 months have been crazy and, very challenging worldwide. And just how have you been coping? How have you been affected, I guess, by the pandemic and sort of, I guess, being a mental health advocate? How's your mental health been?
Yeah, I think that's such a huge question because the scope of it, I mean, we've been in lockdown, we've been in this pandemic for so long now. So I feel like there's definitely been different stages to it. When people ask me that question, it actually kind of gets me like, well, I mean, at one point I was like this, and then at one point I was like this. For me, it's been a journey. I feel like definitely being like a quote unquote young person and then having a birthday, which, sets me onto that, into the more later 20s. I've definitely grown through this pandemic. I went into it a woman of God, a woman of faith, and I feel like my faith has definitely helped me in that time. I think when I say growth, I definitely grew with God in the first pandemic and just through my faith a lot. And I know that a lot of people did connect to God more because we had those still times, we had those quiet times. So yeah, that was a big part of like coping. I think just getting closer to God, just speaking more, being truthful. I think when not to make it all about God, obviously.
No, that's your truth. Like, that's fine.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is the humility and being very self-reflective and just bringing yourself to someone that is higher than yourself. And a part of that is that, you need humility to do that. And I feel like when you're going through change like a pandemic, having that self-reflection with love and with kindness, of course, that kind of lends their approach to it. But having that humility and to say, okay, I can't control this situation, I don't have it all figured out, really helped me to like really grow through this. But it has been a challenging time for everyone. I mean, mental health, I wasn't a mental health advocate so much. I was, but not like professionally or publicly so much before the pandemic. I've just seen that young people have been really, really affected by this. And I've had my own mental health journey a few years back. So I was able to just really relate to what people are going through right now. A big part of looking at the pandemic as a whole, to summarize as well, is that it is a time of change, but I really do always see opportunity in change, opportunity to grow. And I feel like that is definitely like, represented through a lot of people who are saying, okay, this is the quote unquote new normal. How am I adapting to this situation? We've seen like so many people be creative. We've seen so many businesses made in this time. We've seen people do stuff that they just really love, all while we're all enduring and we're all having this shared experience. So I think, going off that is knowing that, we're not alone in this and we all are having the shared experience. I feel like there's a beauty in it, apart from obviously the unfortunate, result of it, which is deaths and separation and isolation. But the other side of it is that there is this beauty that is a shared experience and it is what we make of it. And I think there's been a lot of people raising their voice and not allowing just the norm to be the norm anymore. And I'm sure we'll get more into that as well. Advocacy within the show today.
I mean, wow, what an optimistic person. My gosh, like everything that you have as an outlook on a pretty crappy year for a lot of people, you've sort of completely seen it with such a light, which I absolutely love. And I think it's difficult to do that. It's a difficult thing to go through something that it's so new, it's so weird, and I think it's quite difficult for a lot of people to find the positives and to feel uplifted. And I think it's great that you're able to sort of reflect and recognize all those things. Like you said, you're not blind to all of the negative things that have happened, but wow, what a positive start. So before we started recording, you were actually telling us that, not to bring the mood down, but that you had actually been working and that like many people, you didn't get your contract renewed. What was the job that you were doing? Because it was very much about helping people, wasn't it?
Yeah, so this was in a time I was 24 and graduated 3 years before that. I graduated with a journalism degree, and I really, really not had a hard time, but really stumbled through getting into the industry. So it was quite a battle, actually getting into like the big industry. I did get there in the end. But then when I got there, let's say, the BBCs, the ITVs and those places, I realized that they're just not covering what I want to talk about and what I care about.
Right.
So the job that I went into was an internship with a social innovation company that works in human rights and voicing and social movements, and works with big charities to create campaigns for social change. And it did feel like the job. I was like, oh, finally, this is, you know, what I've been leading to.
I've made it.
Yeah. It was everything I care about. They talked about stuff from women's health, sexual health, to voting rights, to, you know, black people's right, to climate change. Like, it was all these kind of amazing things. And unfortunately, my contract, just ended just before the pandemic started, which was, again, it's one of those things, like, if I could change it, I would have. But in the end of the day, like, you really have to take change, you know, as an opportunity. So even though it was a difficult time, I just had to realize, like, that me that was in that job doing that's done now, and I need to grow and take what I've learned and build off of that, which I was able to do. So I went and volunteered with the Women's Equality Party soon after that, to use, like, voicing and campaigning for their campaigns. And they don't just cover women, even though that is their you know, focus, but covering children's mental health, families, and the fathers within it. And so that's been really good. And then we were doing, like, homeless outreach during the pandemic as well. So I had the time to go back and do these community things. I think, especially as, like, a activist and an advocate, especially in the digital world, you can really feel, like, quite separate from the cause when you're trying to strategize and you're trying to voice and create. Sometimes it's nice to go back to the place where it's happening and be present there.
I think that's so lovely that you did that, especially in a pandemic. I think it's it'd be understandable to feel quite fearful to do those things. You know, I mean, I'm someone who's felt fearful leaving the house, let alone, you know, going to help others, which I think is something that I would love to do. I think it's brilliant that you did that. And also, sort of moving on from that, or sort of relating to that, back in July of last year, you sort of announced on social media through Instagram that you had joined a network, or an activist network, called The Campaigner, that you had written a newsletter for them, which, they, from my understanding, they provide up-to-date information on the Black Lives Matter movement. How did you become a part of this? How did you hear about this? Like, how did it all happen?
Yeah, so I actually created it.
Oh, wow, so you're the founder of it.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have introduced you as that.
Yeah, I mean, it's still growing. So the idea came actually in 2019. I was involved with a charity called Forward, which works on preventing violence against girls and women, and they specialise in sexual violence in England as well, but it derives from places in Africa and the Caribbean, particularly Africa, where things like FGM and sexual violence happens culturally, but they advocate in the UK, right? So yeah, I was with them. I was a fellowship on their fellowship, and then I created a project, was a social action project, which looked into sexual harassment in online spaces and offline spaces, but the focus was online. And doing that, I realized, and I heard many stories about, you know, fellow journalists and female politicians, what they get in the media, what they get online, the trolls, the abuse, but I didn't realize how bad it really is. They are activists in themselves. When you're doing journalistic work for people, when you're a politician, when you are an activist as well, self-claimed activist, you can face so much abuse online, especially if you're female and especially if you're Black. So the idea came from protecting and creating a protective and healing space for activists. I know that activists fight a scope of different causes, right? So it has to be kind of bespoke, but one thing they share is being able to share these safe spaces like this podcast, and being able to, you know, feel like they can have peers and people that understand really what they're going through when they're facing abuse for putting out, you know, advocacy work or voicing their opinion, when they face personalized abuse about their gender, about their race, really, really dark and horrible things, just for wanting to be a politician, just for wanting to fight for a good cause. So yeah, it was really prevalent to me that this was an issue. So I wanted to create an activist network, but I didn't know exactly like how I was going to do it. I worked with Purpose, that social change agency before, but I just didn't feel very confident to start my own thing. But it was definitely on my mind. I was thinking about it, and then obviously the George Floyd murder happened, unfortunately, and the Black Lives Matter movement took off, and I thought, you know what, this is the time to start this. So.
Yeah, definitely. I thought your timing was impeccable. as soon as everything started coming out, I was like, oh, perfect. Because I think when you have friends, like I've known you for a number of years, so obviously I follow you on social media. This is like the same thing applies to everyone. If you've got a friend who suddenly shares a post about something that can help spread awareness and stuff, it's great because it reaches out to more people. So I thought it was brilliant that you did this. What sort of made you think the campaigner, like the name?
I'm not really sure. I think what it was, and this is kind of like the focus for it as well, is bringing like activism to the everyday, quote unquote, everyday person that may not already be involved in activism themselves. And I feel like we really saw that from the Black Lives Matter movement, that really people took that agency into their own hands. I've seen your posts as well a lot, and I've been loving them. And it's like taking it into your own hands and sharing these things and having a minute or two to have these conversations within your peer groups and fighting for justice, right? So the campaigner was more like creating an activist network where anyone can be a campaigner.
I love it.
Yeah, and creating it like, yeah, that agency and self-focus for a shared cause.
So you mentioned the murder of George Floyd. I wanted to ask you, do you feel that it's positive that the movement has now reached more people, or is there kind of that frustration that it took yet another public murder to get people's attention?
Yeah, so I think for me, and I think when you ask anyone that's been, you know, articulating this and speaking on these things for a little while, and I feel like it was George Floyd's death, definitely, but it was also the fact that we were in a pandemic, we were locked on our phones. It was so many of these different factors that contributed to, you know, it being raised in such a way. You know, things happen for a reason, not relating that to George Floyd's death exactly, but more that it was meant to come to light now at this time for it to really, you know, take heed and blow up in the way that it did. So I really do feel like it was a chain reaction that should have happened.
Like it happened for a reason, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Again, not George Floyd's death. I don't think I wouldn't ever put that on that. But the fact that it came to light, it would have come to light in one way or the other. I do really feel like that it was a year of change. I feel like when you're a Black person and you've gone through these experiences, be it a lighter skinned Black person, so I haven't endured and felt what seems to be darker Black person has. So that's obviously, but I've had some shared experiences growing up where I've grown up, and you see these things, and I think the word trauma is really conveyed what a lot of people were feeling. It's not so much like, oh, it's annoying because it took this to do this. It's just a reminder of our everyday experiences.
Right.
So it's more like, oh, this again. But because it was so violent and so open, it kind of hit a lot of people. It wasn't just, oh, this again, this is annoying, or it was more like, yeah, I know that could have been me. Like it was very personal. And again, it was like contributing factors. We're in a pandemic, we saw it again and again and again on our phones that we were glued to. It was like a quite traumatic time, and I feel like it was more like having to take very specific breaks from social media and from the conversation, because it's not like you're having a conversation about a cause, like maybe something that I've worked on before, an issue that I care about but maybe hasn't directly affected me. It's talking about my life, basically. It's talking about all our lives that we've lived before on a violent level. So it's so it was one of those things where it was like, again, it's giving it to something bigger than yourself, and knowing that if I take that break, I know that my peers and people who aren't taking a break right now are able to take that conversation and keep it going. And I think that's the great thing about it, that it had many voices. The movement had many enablers, but I think, again, that was a process, and I feel it was a process of conflicting with, you know, a certain white people that didn't want to acknowledge that experience, and that was traumatic again in itself, because it brings you back to the situation
like a cycle.
You weren't able to articulate yourself when you were younger and around white people and you felt oppressed or felt racism, and you couldn't. It feels those feelings of that you can't speak out for yourself. You're trapped, you're isolated, and it brings back that trauma. So yeah, it was a real process, but very sad that it took George Floyd again to die for it to come out, and it's very sad that it took a process for people to really understand. But again, I genuinely think it should have happened.
Do you feel like the movement is still it has its momentum, or do you feel like it's sort of dwindling a bit? Do you feel like it's, I don't want to say stopping because we know it's not stopping, but do you feel it's slowed down at all in any way?
Yeah, I think it's just, again, the process of the movement and what movements are in themselves. Theoretically, when you think about it, like there's always going to be different stages of a movement. It starts with an incident, or like George Floyd, it starts with a big incident that gets people talking, and people then are able to speak up about it and then get allyship, and then there's the strategists that, you know, speak further on it, and then it disbands naturally. It disbands into the communities that it needs to disband into. So like I was saying, many of us have been doing this, you know, healing centered work, and have been doing justice work for a long time. They were used to something like this happening, maybe not on such a big scale, but it's not that they join the movement and then they disappear themselves. They know that once the attention leaves, the work still continues, but it just continues within those communities that it is. So, for example, and there's many key players in that. And I think what's good about this movement is that it brought, you know, the cause to light to the higher levels. So there was more government funding. There is initiatives now in schools. There are, you know, powerful people having certain conversations. There is the diversity and inclusion more in works. There is funding again available. There are people speaking out about it. There are more platforms now open to talk about it. So it simmers down, but the effect is lasting in these areas. It's connecting people, and this is what I, you know, we would love to do as the campaigner grows, but connecting the public again with the narrative, so the narrative that has gone into these subsections, and showing that the work is not that the work is finished, and not that it's done properly yet. Let's just get that clear. But that the work is still continuing, just not in the same power of not in the same voice as a protest, but it's just gone beyond that now.
I think it's a really interesting way that you've sort of worded it, because it's almost like seeing the Black Lives Matter movement as like a lesson, if that makes sense. Like everyone's been invited to this lesson, and then not so much that they've left the lesson and forgot it. It's like, right, I've learned my lesson here, I'm now going to go and teach this to other people. Like the way that you've said, it's not stopped, it's definitely still going, but it's now being taught within the communities and stuff. And it's the idea of more communities now have been given this lesson. They've more, you know, like white people are now being taught about what it means for Black Lives Matter, and so many other communities as well. And I think it's just a really interesting way to word it, to think of it as when people are sort of in fear that the Black Lives Matter movement has stopped. It's like you said, it hasn't stopped. It's just everyone's now taken their lesson from it and they're trying to apply it. I think that's a really nice way to look at it. What I kind of wanted to ask you as well, actually, is from social media, there are so many posts about how white people should be getting the information themselves. They're capable of researching information, and you shouldn't ask a Black person to educate you, if that makes sense. And I wondered what your thought was on that, because part of me is like, absolutely, you shouldn't be going up to every Black person like, what should I do? It's like, take some initiative, go and find out yourself. But I also wonder, is there a danger of some sort where they're educating themselves on something that they have no knowledge of, like, so they could therefore be getting the wrong information? Do you feel like not that those posts are necessarily dangerous, but that white people shouldn't feel like that they can't ask you questions? Like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think I've debated this question before, and I feel like it just comes down to having a human level, a human approach to things. If you know that someone's been hurt by something deeply on a traumatic level, of which your group that you socially belong to has been the cause of it, it's natural that you shouldn't, you know, pester someone about it and take your own initiative. I feel like not a lot of people have that accountability and sense of responsibility, whether that's their choosing or how we're programmed as humans to always continually reach to something else to gain knowledge and understanding, instead of really taking our own initiative and maybe, you know, understanding things on a level. But I think a big part of it is there are books that are written by Black people. There are many Black people have written books, and it just takes a Google search really to go and find them. I feel like a lot of Black people did share these resources, so I don't think there's a massive excuse for not understanding that you can go and find these resources really quite easily. But touching on your point that they might reach for the wrong, maybe they did search and they reached for the wrong source of information. I feel like there needs to be a two-way, and I feel like a lot of Black people were able to have that two-way with white people to say, okay, these are the resources and stuff like that. So I feel like that dialogue did really happen. But I think, again, when you're traumatized by something, and it's like we were living in that moment with George Floyd incident, it is like very insensitive to pester someone about something which you can go and Google, and I think it just brings up that trauma again of receiving something from someone and them not acknowledging their role in it, if you get what I mean.
Yes.
Even if their intentions are good, it's kind of like someone could say something racist to you unintentionally, but then not take accountability that it is racist. It's that same kind of thing. You're going through this trauma, which you're experiencing because of the society that we have created, but instead of acknowledging that and taking my own initiative to then go look up the books that many Black people have shared, I'm coming to you again, and it just is a sense of unacknowledgement of positions. But I think so. I definitely back, as you can tell, I can definitely back the side of people taking initiative and not being like inconsiderate. There is a two-way needed, and again, this is where the different characters come into play. Some people might not be able to be resourceful like that, Black people, but they shouldn't have to feel like they should be if they're going through it mentally. And some people are, like, I'm a bit more open to it, but again, that's because I haven't felt the certain types of racism that my darker Black people would have felt. So it's easier for me to have those dialogues. Should I be clapped for because I'm able to do that? No, I shouldn't be, because it's easier for me to do naturally. Right. So again, it's just analysing the situation, I think. I agree. Understanding everyone's roles.
Yeah. So sort of coming back to the activism side of things, there's so many different forms of activism, aren't there? You have anything from signing petitions to being anti-racist and learning yourself. And then there's things like protests as well. And I wondered, what do you feel that you relate most to? Because I feel like you clearly must cover quite a few areas of activism. Like, did you go to any of the protests that happened in London?
I did. And I feel like there was like this amazing feeling of unity when I went. So for me, my activism has always been around like healing, the power of healing. So my activism is around healing, and I think healing comes in many forms, and I think there's different stages to it, definitely. But what protests did for me and for many people was that it let out a lot of this pain that was kept in and harbored in this time that we couldn't let out because we were locked in our houses because of the pandemic, and also it's traumatic pain. And when I say that, it's because it's pain that we've had locked away for a very long time and have had to, regardless of being in four walls in the pandemic or not. So what that did is protest, and even the whole movement, it acknowledges your pain that you have not been able to, maybe not even been able to articulate before as a young Black person or as a young woman, or whatever group you fall into, that you haven't been able to articulate, but also hasn't been acknowledged by people that have put that pain on you unknowingly or knowingly. So what that protest did, just released a lot of that pain and brought unity and love. When I went there, I just felt love. I just felt so much love and unity. And to release the pain, I think people who have worked in trauma will tell you this, once you release the pain, you can't just let it sit. It's like opening a can of worms. You have to find ways to really let it go and let it out without forgetting about it. And I think protest really did that. It released the pain and brought love and unity together. So that was amazing. And then it's like, okay, what's next? We've released all this pain. we raised our voices, but what's really next? And I think the work in like policy and continually raising your voice and, signing up for things and writing about things, speaking about things, getting together these key players, which I saw a lot in the movement, a lot of key players come together, a lot of youth leaders as well, because I think when it comes to racism and any form of oppression, who's it passed down to? It's passed down to young people. That's how it continues. Those people, if they're racist, they won't be here forever, but their children will be. So the next level of it, I think the next level of healing is definitely knowing that, at, okay, once I'm healed and my sister's healed and my brother's healed, what are we doing now for our futures? Our futures, kids are the future, that cliche line, but they are.
Yeah.
So now the healing continues, knowing that now you're able to push that onto the next generation of saying, okay, no, we're going to question everything we're taught. Like, we're going to empower you. We're going to bring self-worth to your identity. And that's where the healing continues.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I wanted to ask you, what does it mean to you to be a woman of colour in Britain? And you mentioned before that you didn't experience, or you haven't experienced as much trauma as those with darker skin than you. But can you tell me a bit more? Do you feel like there have been more or less opportunity? Is it quite competitive?
For me, growing up, the biggest thing that I felt was that there just wasn't any representation. I was growing up in a very white, predominantly white area. There was literally like 3 coloured people. I want to say coloured because there was a range, so black and minority, and 2 of us were mixed race. So like there was really no diversity, and there was no social media, there was no mixed race or person in the media either. You know, the only media we had was like Beyonce and Rihanna, who were American and superstars. So it's like there was really like, they really influenced me. Beyonce influenced me, but that's another story for another day. But there was that lack of representation, and I feel like even being, you know, mixed race and having like a black parent or a white parent who maybe just themselves cannot actually relate to being mixed race in that way, because they've grown up within their solid black or white communities and not knowing the difference of not having that foundational community. So it's definitely a big part of like finding my identity. And yeah, that was definitely swayed. I mean, even understanding colorism and understanding that there are certain social benefits of having lighter skin. Obviously in school I was aware that I didn't face the racism that maybe my darker counterparts did face. Not that they faced it, but that they could have faced. And I didn't have many darker black people around me, so I can't actually speak on it properly. But it was when I went to London and was around and a lot of darker skinned black people that I realized that there were actual certain social benefits of having lighter skin. Again, that came with its challenges, because I'm just me. Like, I'm just me. Why am I being prescribed all these things from, you know, white people, black people, and this and that? But again, I can't act as a victim because I know that I do live with the benefits. So going back to your first question, yeah, there was a lack of representation, so it was really identity, trying to just find myself constantly. And I think I bore a lot of shame, a constant insecurity and shame. Thank God I have a crazy personality and cool parents, because I was able to just express, like, I don't know who I was, but I was able to express it in all its joy and form. I think in social circles, growing up in a predominantly white community, there was definitely a lot of shame just being there.
From yourself, or you felt that was given, that shame was put on you? Like, you felt shame yourself, or like you were made to feel shame?
I mean, looking back at it now as an adult, I can tell that I was made to feel shame through the microaggressions, through the little sly comments. I always had to fight for my social position, and I didn't realize until I got older that that wasn't actually right. But when you're younger, you bear that shame yourself, as if something's wrong with you, but you can't put your finger on it, if you get what I mean. So even like walking down the street, I couldn't like look people in the eyes ever. Like, it's just a lot of shame, and I feel like a lot of black people will feel that. But then I think, again, as I got older, there was quite a lot of initiatives into getting, you know, diversity and stuff like that. I was an extremely ambitious young person to do what I wanted to do in the journalism industry, which is very still predominantly white. But again, it was because I had lighter skin, I have a more formal accent, that I was able to really access those areas. I know if I was from a different demographic, potentially darker skin, it would have been harder to get those opportunities. But again, I did work really hard for them. There's no doubt about that. At the same time, again, I got to these places, like I was saying before, these big industries, and I just didn't feel that they were representative. Not saying, you know, the narrative has to be all about me and black people, but it is about that inclusivity. And I just felt that our voices and the real things that people, you know, from my community do want to speak about just weren't in the scope of things, because that's how their businesses run. One thing I do want to say, though, is that I really do want to get away from this narrative that's attached to black people about being victims, being constant victims, because even though, you know, we have faced a lot, there is a lot of glory and triumph as well within, you know, building within our communities and building the new blueprint and stuff like that. I feel like for me, like trying to navigate through this with trying to find my identity and in different spaces, there has been opportunities and there has been beautiful like instances and realizations and experiences that have come from it. And I wouldn't ever want the narrative of victim to take place constantly, even though it needs attention in the main narrative. But I wouldn't want it to be like something that takes over the beauty that comes from our self-worth, our self-identity, and how we champion and overcome barriers every single day. I feel like that really needs to be celebrated.
Definitely. So I wanted to know if you ever feel like, because like I've said, there's so many things now available on social media and in general, just so much information. But do you ever feel that you're not relating to some of the posts that come out? Do you ever feel that you can't relate to some of the things and stories or experiences or information that is put out there?
Are you referring to like the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I actually do relate to a lot of it, if not all of it. I think the beautiful thing about it is that Black people and Black communities have really taken the narrative for themselves and been the key spokespeople within it. And it isn't now from the industries or from those key gatekeepers before to speak on our experience. It's really come from us. Now, the internet has its, it's a lot. The internet has a lot. So I haven't seen obviously everything, so I can't say I agree with everything. From what I have seen, it's like, it just touches on this shared experience that a lot of us have shared for a long time. And there's different narratives within it. There's narratives for Black women, there's narratives for gay and queer Black people. There's all different narratives in it, but we can still relate to that shared experience one way or another. So I feel like every time I see your post, I think, yes, you're my sis, you're my bro, like whether you're Black or white, obviously, right. Understanding
so it is relatable. You do feel represented when you're seeing these posts. Then you don't feel like it's like over exaggerated or under, what's the word, like it's not one or the other, it's accurate for you.
No, I think it's accurate because it comes from a good place.
Yeah,
these posts come from a good place and come from the need. A lot of them come in the need of healing and justice, and it's difficult to argue with that or find bad things in it when it comes from a good place for healing and justice and progress, whoever it comes from. Obviously everyone has their role to play. White people as allies have their role to play, as well as Asian people as allies, and Black people also have their role to play. So I think that distinction is very important for progress. But other than that, it seems to be all progressive. And I think when it comes to the amount, I don't ever think there's ever too much, because we've had different narratives for so long now from birth, from other news sites, that the more that we repeat these new narratives, the more reprogramming is done. And I think that's the purpose of it. A lot of times people think, oh, they're talking about it again and again. No, they're doing it for specific reasons. So you look at your phone and you see another update and it becomes normal to you when you see this different representation. That's what's happening. So I'm for it, even if I'm not for every single event, or don't feel a part of every single event. I know that it's for a better cause.
So you studied multimedia journalism at uni. Was it something you always had an interest in? Did you intend to go on to help with political and racial justice and awareness, or did that just happen organically for you?
Yeah, I think my uni professors probably hated me because everything was about a social cause when I did it. And when I went to uni, it was very still much like people have been in the industry for 30-40 years, still very old school journalism. Get the news piece out, go to court, do this very unemotive, very balanced. But it's like, how can you be so balanced about something that is really affecting people's lives? Like, you really do have to stick for a side and work within that. I think we saw that quite recently last year when journalists were videoing refugees on the boat, and a lot of people argued, what is journalism? You're here, you get to go back to your nice warm studio, get to have lunch with your peers after just filming people who are literally so close to death. What is journalism? And I feel like this is what I've been thinking for years, and this is why I came away from journalism, because although it is important, I'm not saying journalists aren't important. Journalists have done more for us than we give them credit for, especially in the past. News, you know, changing laws, helping change laws, helping give news, helping bring to light many scandals and many things is very important. But now, as we're getting, you know, as we're into this new space of change and not accepting the norm, it's how far can journalism really go, and what is it not doing for us? And I feel like a lot of people have been able to speak on that and said, okay, well, news is one thing, but what are we doing with our communities? What healing focus is around it? Are you including everyone? Are you including everyone's voices, or just being sensitive about it? A lot of time journalists aren't. Go back to it, journalism. Yeah, I was always doing social causes, and maybe my teachers, I had clashed with my professors a little bit about that. I was really interested in like multimedia and UX, kind of digital campaigning from early on, but I didn't know that there was a word or term for it. I was just doing it within my like digital assignments. Like I remember I was pitching once and I brought up like Amnesty International's new like amazing digital page where they had like this interactive timeline and like different like refugee voices with like pictures and videos, and I was like, oh my god, I would love to do this. And like one of my teachers was like, yeah, okay, and the other one was like, why would you ever bring up Amnesty International for a news piece? And I was just like, you just don't get it. And like I feel like these are exact voices that try and minimize you and what you believe, and you just have to keep sticking at it and you will find your way. And I think you really have to go through those experiences and years doing something maybe that you didn't want to do, just to get to what you actually really want to do.
Yeah.
Was that ever, I mean, it must have been frustrating, but to keep having professors sort of be condescending and be, like you said, sort of just crushing those sort of natural interests, like and good interests that you were having, like that's a great example to use for journalism. And the fact that they would have said no straight off the cuff, it just seems like that would frustrate me to no end. So I mean, how was regularly for you?
Yeah, I mean, it would have been frustrating if it was the first instant that happened,
right.
But I've literally had this all my life when it comes to my identity and who I am. So it's not, and that, I'm not even just saying that like, oh, I've endured this. It's literally
the facts.
It's literally the feeling I've had all my life from people. So you just build this muscle up where you're just like, okay, cool. Like you're like, and it is, and it's not so much frustrating, it's alienating. And where I think when you're young as well and you don't have that firm grasp of who you are and you've gone through these experiences that you are unable to share with other people, it can bring you back again to that feeling where you're like, I am this small and irrelevant and you're this. So I think it did bring me back to that moment, and it kind of, especially when it's like you're working towards your goals and grades and you have to pass to get to your future, or you're sold that you have to do your degree to actually go out and do what you want in the real world. I think it can be quite disheartening, but again it taps into that feeling, this has happened before, I'll get through this kind of thing. It's like,
that must have been so conflicting for you, because it's like, no, I've got to stick to what I believe in, but also like it's almost like I have to follow these certain like rules and like tick all these boxes in order to get
the grade,
progress further and do what I want to do later on. So it's like,
it's disheartening. I think again, I've been this crazy girl in my own world. So I did put everything on that. I immersed myself in so many different projects that I love to do. So it was just like I just went and put it into that. But that is a great, like, it's a great question, a great, you know, topic, because a lot of people, and a lot of Black and young people of colour face this, where they are constantly challenged on who they are and what they are, that they numb themselves. I'm someone that was able to spring off into creative projects because I had a family who were creative. I had a family who pushed me into these things all the time. So I was, even though I stumbled and fell and stuff like that, and you know, it manifested in not so great ways in some senses, I still had that ability to go and do what I wanted to do. But that is literally down to my, you know, privileged circumstances. If I didn't have my background and I didn't have my parents who were able to be active in my life, if I didn't have these things, and I come from a Black single mother as well, so I'm talking on a not the privileged level, I'm talking on a level where I had parents that cared but maybe weren't able to be present always in my life, but they had morals and they had certain attributes that they showed me that I was able to, you know, lean on. But when you don't have that at all, it's so easy to have those voices and have those things that constantly come against you in a day-to-day basis and go numb and give up. And this is what we're seeing with young Black people who go numb, they give up, they get excluded from school, they get in the wrong friend group, which are family to them, they get in the wrong situations, and they're disqualified from life. They're disqualified from opportunities, they're disqualified from society, and they turn to, you know, horrible things, and they're shown as the enemy, they're shown as the criminal, they're shown as the bad one, when actually it's this, again, having your identity challenged constantly and minimized, that it can be so numbing and such a, you know, detrimental thing. And I think this is like what we're waking up to now. It's like, okay, what's the future people, the young people, like how has my experience, how can we change that for them?
Just to go slightly off topic onto something that you touched on earlier, you spoke about your faith, and I wanted to know a bit more about that. When did you find your faith, and how has that helped you? And you told us that it has helped you through the past year, and I couldn't help but love your positivity. And has that all come from, you think, your faith and finding it?
Yeah, I think my faith definitely keeps me going during these times. I think when you come into your faith at a later stage in your life, like I did, I had parents that came from the church, but they didn't want to bring me up in the church particularly. They wanted to let me find my path in it. So God has always been present in my life. I come from a Jamaican family who are very, very grounded in God and very grounded in giving, that they gave their life to giving, being those, I don't know if you're familiar with it, maybe you are, but when you have Caribbean and African communities, you have that one or two grandmothers of the church or aunties of the church, that their house, you can go to, anyone who has become homeless, anyone who is in need will go to their house, and they will feed them, they will clothe them, they will, you know, help them get on their feet. My family was that family. It's only when my mum and dad, you know, moved from my area that I wasn't going to church. But yeah, like I said, I've got praying grandparents and they're in my life. So God has always had a presence in my life. It came particularly at a time I started to go to church in uni a little bit, but I just kind of fit it around my schedule, just something I wanted to do, but I wasn't 100% committed yet, even though I wanted to be. It was only until after uni that I faced a lot of like terrible instances within the span of like 3-4 weeks. It was just constant that I had to really I went through like severe depression around 23, 24 years old, and I just didn't have the tools or the knowledge of what I was going through, and I didn't ask for help. I didn't get any of these things, so I really just turned to God in that instance. And it took a real big process of turning to God as well. It led to me getting baptized, which is really good.
I saw the video on your Instagram.
I like being open about it. I think there's a lot that is painted of religion, which I completely understand, and a lot of Christians will actually call themselves more people of faith rather than of a religion, and I'm in that way as well, because the practice of religion, practiced in the best ways and the most inclusive ways and progressive ways, but your connection and faith with God is being able to see the light in a lot of situations, and being able to move with grace for yourself and for others. And when I say that, it's not so much that I'm getting, angry and annoyed at certain things and certain people, but it's understanding, not giving them the grace to act how they want to act, but understanding that they're in a certain circumstance that might make them feel a certain way or be unknowledgeable in certain ways. And if I've gone through a certain situation, it is about having that dialogue and that two-way communication to be able to, that healthy and safe two-way communication to be able to create movement and create progression. So it does give you that grace. Obviously your faith is tested, but it's not more, when I speak about my faith, it's not more like just a set of rules. I need to follow this to be this. It's a feeling of love. It's a feeling of grace. It's a feeling of human nature. I feel
like when we see you on social media talking about your faith, because I'm not particularly religious, but I find a lot of peace witnessing other people who are. Like, I think seeing yourself anyway, like your journey, and the fact that you do find peace in your faith, you do find moments of calm or acceptance or love or all the things that you've just been saying. I think it's a really lovely thing that you have that, and it is quite like a joy for someone else to see.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's really nice. Yeah, I think often we can be separated by these boxes, and this is something that I'm going to advocate more for, but I've been advocating for a while, that ticking yourself in a box is the worst thing you can do, even by profession. When you think about it, oh, I'm just a journalist, people tick you off in a certain way, I'm a politician, when actually, like, we're so many things, like, even though I say I'm a Christian, in a way, it's not to say I'm something and you're not, or I'm any different. It's just that this shared feeling of love and humanity, which we all have.
I think seeing or hearing everything that you've said to us, it's like your life is a combination of your faith, your experience of being a woman of color in a predominantly white country, a white town, schools and stuff, and your family as well, and you've really turned it into something that is so admirable. Just, and I'm not saying that just to sort of, you know, kiss ass or anything, like it really is, like, the fact that you're using this and you've turned it into the campaigner as well, which I wanted to lead on to as today's dedication to this episode, just to sort of pay homage to it all and everything. Could you tell people or our listeners how they can sort of get involved with the campaigner? Is there somewhere that they can look at it or to consume it? How do they get involved?
Yeah, so the campaigner is literally just on Instagram. We're growing the Twitter page as well. At the moment, it's just like a page just to keep raising awareness for Black issues and justice. Like I said, I want to turn it into a place of healing more so, and unity and connection. Healing comes in many forms, as well as seeking justice and raising your voice, but also self-education and self-love and unity within that. It's been a crazy time. I feel like a new field has been created where we're learning and we're stepping and we're walking together, and sometimes fights break out and stuff like that. But again, everything is a process and we have to go through these challenges to move forward. And I just thank, you know, people like yourselves. I see you on social media and I see you creating podcasts like this, creating safe spaces where you're open to taking on other people's opinions of people that don't look like you, and we're able to find a shared experience. We talked about faith today. Finding that shared experience, that love and unity is the most powerful thing. So yeah, the campaigner is small at the moment, but it will be growing hopefully soon. I'm going to keep going with it. Just follow the page. I am actually looking for someone to join as a social media volunteer intern. So if there is anyone listening,
definitely
let me know.
Get involved. So where can they find you? Is it at the campaigner?
Yeah, at the campaigner, and then there's like a little underscore at the end.
Perfect. So if everyone can please go and check that out and get involved, that would be amazing, and try and sort of really push this so that it can spread awareness and spread healing, as Natalie said. So I think the way that we'd like to wrap this up is how we do with all of our guests, and it's just by asking, what is your circle made up of? As our episode or our podcast is called Our Circle, we'd like to know what your circle is made up of.
My circle is made up of definitely my faith. I think sisterhood as well is a really, really important thing. Find your sisterhood, however big or small it is, just people that can relate to you and can bring healing and accountability as well. I think that's the one word maybe we've missed out of this talk, and I've missed myself, is that while there is, you know, changing that narrative, especially around Black people, from victim to, you know, champions, is that part in accountability as well. People that can hold you to account, so that we can be the best that we can be. I think that's a big part of it. So yeah, faith, sisterhood, lots of food, as you say. Lots of food. I think for me, a big part of finding peace is traveling and getting out of, you know, my confinements. At the moment we're in pandemic, so I cannot wait to travel after this, meet new people, keep my mind open and just keep flourishing. I think we just need, you know, that self-confidence, especially after this pandemic and everything we've gone through, to just like spread our wings and do what we love to do. So it's great seeing that you're doing it here.
Oh, thank you. Oh wow, what an amazing sort of chat to have. Thank you so much for coming on here. We've absolutely loved having you, and would love to have you back as well, especially with the campaigner growing, which we hope for you. So for anyone who is watching on YouTube, make sure that you check out our links in the description to Natalie's organization of the campaigner, and you can follow her as well. The links will all be there. Go and check those out. Please make sure to subscribe to this channel, like and follow on all of our social media, and we will see you in our next episode. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.